Hello everybody and welcome to Cabaret Secrets. This is Gary Williams and today I'm joined by Todd Gordon. We've never met, have we, until today, but we've known of the existence of one another for some time.
Correct. Probably about 2 or 3 years ago. And of course we know quite a number of people in common, so that always helps. But we met literally about an hour and a half ago.
And I've heard, and I've sprung this on you. Now, we just met for tea, but I've sprung this on you. And I remember a few years ago I was working with some of the fellows from the BBC Big Band and they were raving about you, and that's when I first heard about you, because one of your great passions is singing with big bands.
I have to say it's one of the most energising and exciting things that, well, in my view, a singer can do. It's just a pity that it's all too rare that singers, because of the costs involved, it's all too rare that singers get the opportunity to do it, or audiences get the chance to see it.
Can you remember the first time you sang with the BBC Big Band and what it felt like?
Yeah, it was probably the most nerve-wracking experience I've ever had, because it felt like, oh my God, this is for real. Because not only was it my first opportunity to perform with the BBC Big Band, but it was also being broadcast on Radio 2. And there was this little voice at the back of my mind saying, you screw up on a note here. It's not just this audience, you know. And it was at the BBC.
It's the whole country.
It was the whole country. Every listener is going to be saying, oh, he can't sing.
Yeah.
And it was in Birmingham Town Hall. And it sold out, and again, I'm used to maybe kind of audiences of maybe, 200, 400 people, not often 12 or 1,300 people, and I remember just looking at this audience out there, all expecting their money's worth and thinking this is being recorded and it's the band, and will I remember the lyrics, and what song comes next, and
did you remember the lyrics?
I think so. If I haven't, I've erased it from my memory bank. No, it went all right.
A big gig like that is quite different from a small, sort of intimate cabaret experience. And of course, what I'm really interested in, our listeners are interested in, is cabaret. And cabaret, when I put the book together, I found it was really difficult to define, because actually, in the end, I realised that cabaret can go across all sorts of sizes of venues and all sorts of genres as well, but traditionally we still do think of it as being a small and intimate space and kind of making that connection. Is that something that you enjoy doing, or do you prefer working in a big space in a concert style sort of environment?
That's a tough one. What was it Sinatra used to say about his favourite song? Well, that's like asking me if I like steak better than ice cream. And it's that sort of, they all have, well, each kind of setting has its own joys and traumas, and but I love the intimacy of where you can really engage close up with an audience, and there's something special about whether it's Pete's on the Park or some of the supper club type rooms, that there is just such a kind of, there's no other word, intimacy, and I regard my role as a singer is primarily to convey a story of whatever it is the songwriter's writing about. Mm-hmm. And if it can come across as genuine and totally engages with the person or resonates with the listener or the audience member, then that makes me very happy. And I also love it when, again, and it happens usually in the kind of smaller venues, because you get a chance to meet people afterwards, when they come up to me and say, that song the second time around, who wrote it again? And if it might be an old song, but if I can introduce that to someone that's never heard a kind of lesser known gem before, I get a terrific buzz from that.
And how important is it, the things that you say, how important is that, as well as the things that you sing in a cabaret environment? You mentioned to me earlier on about a Tony Bennett show that you did. Yeah. How much thought did you give to the links, the patter in between the songs? How important is that?
Well, that for me it's vital. If I had a voice like Nat King Cole, I probably wouldn't speak between songs. But
if you had a voice like Nat King Cole, I wouldn't want you to speak in between songs.
So I kind of feel it's my way of engaging with, or if people can go away from a performance thinking, oh, I didn't know that. Or did you remember that line he said about such and such a song being, almost dropped from a show or whatever? That to me it's informative without being. I don't want it to seem like a lecture, as if I'll be asking questions afterwards. But if people just go away thinking a little bit more about, I didn't realise so and so had recorded that song, first, or back in 1927 or something like that. So I will put snippets in. And with the Tony Bennett show as an example, I have done, as you have, shows that focus on Sinatra's work or Nat King Cole's work, and I always felt that's okay because it's a homage to people who are no longer with us. With Tony Bennett, I felt rather awkward about that because I don't know why.
He could have turned up halfway through your set.
Yeah, so you're doing it all wrong.
What the hell are you doing?
Cashing in on my name, and I'm not even dead yet. Yeah. So I actually got in touch with him and asked if he would have any objection to it, and he said, I'd regard it as a compliment. And
I'm going to give you the prize for the most subtle, perfect name drop. I just love that you just gave Tony a call and said, "Hey Tony, it's Todd."
I met him backstage.
No, don't spoil it. Don't spoil it. That's great. But that's great. So you asked it, and I always think with doing a show, you're right about. You want to give people interesting bits of information, but I always say I don't want it. They've not come for a lecture. It's not a history lesson, And I try and make it all about. I try and make it personal. That could be personal to me, why this song is important to me. A friend of mine, Michael Dorr, who's quoted in the book, says everybody loves gossip. At the end of the day, everybody loves gossip, and a few people have said that. So I make it personal about me or personal about them.
Yes.
And so it's not just facts. Is that something that you try and incorporate into the show as well?
Very much so. I remember, we're sitting in Edinburgh, and not far from where we're sitting, I did a fringe show, and we were doing it 6 nights a week for 3 weeks, and I remember the second night, we started on a Sunday, and this was the Monday night, and one of the songs I included, and in fact I've just recorded it, is Alone Again Naturally, the Gilbert O'Sullivan song. And I do say to the audience, and subsequently I have told audiences, I should say, that on this night, second night of the 18-night run, I remember performing the song, and I do give a kind of an explanation to those who might not remember it, and I say it's a narrative about a guy who's jilted at the altar and wants to commit suicide, and then later on in the song his father dies, then his mother dies. It's a real cheery sing-along number. And then I go into the song, and I remember we were just halfway through, my pianist David Patrick was halfway through a lovely solo, and I noticed this couple at the back of the room, and an older couple. And I noticed the man look towards what I assume was his wife, and then put his hands in the shape of a revolver and to his temple and just kind of went. And I remember thinking, how the hell do I carry on singing this meaningful song when I'm driving the audience to utter despair and depression? And so I now feel that I should give out Prozac at the interval, just to kind of, keep them sane, But that absolutely true. And I remember thinking, oh my God, I might just have to drop this.
Yeah. And what about humour, incorporating humour into a show? Is that something you think's important or not?
Well, some would say my singing's pretty funny, but no, absolutely. I am not a stand-up comedian, and I'm not very good at telling jokes. But I love it if there's a kind of anecdote that, and again, it's like you were saying, Gary. If I find it amusing, and I don't mind kind of regurgitating what somebody else, like Jack Benny or whoever might have said. Or if there's an anecdote that I think is really funny, I'll happily repeat it. But I don't set out to be funny. But on the other hand, there was a promoter who's not known, he organises jazz festivals, and he's not known for being overly complimentary, because I think that means, or he probably feels that means he's got to pay more for the artist. Yeah. But he did say, and I thought there was a criticism coming, he said, the thing with your concerts, God, that's a leading, as if, and another thing, he said, people leave your shows happier than when they went in. I was waiting for the kind of follow-up.
And I
thought, I wouldn't, if that was my show business epitaph.
Yeah, that's nice.
I'm happy with that.
That's nice. And you are a promoter as well. You put together shows, particularly on the jazz scene. That's right? You're a promoter.
Yeah.
You produce things. What is the secret with doing that? Because it's very easy to lose a lot of money, particularly for artists doing it themselves, because we all think we're wonderful and everybody's going to be queuing up to buy tickets for our shows, and when sometimes it's difficult to be very objective, particularly about ourselves, and the costs involved can really mount up with putting on a show.
Yeah. If I knew the secret, I would probably be asking you to interview me on my yacht.
Damn, I was hoping you would tell us that we could all retire.
No, because I can only tell you that I can endorse fully what you're saying about losing money. And
what is that? There's a great quote that I put in the book from Chief Sitting Bull in Annie Get Your Gun, and he says, it's something like, always keep arrow sharp, and never get feet wet, and never put money in show business. Wise words.
I wish I'd heard that about 5 years ago, yes.
Yeah.
No, it's, well, and what was the Ronnie Scott comment about how do you make $1 million in jazz? Start out with 2.
Never heard that. Yeah,
it's true. And
we're not being very encouraging to our listeners. Maybe we should just don't bother.
I think,
is that the advice?
I'd just be just don't underestimate how challenging it can be. My career before my previous career was organising trade fairs and expos, and I learnt very early on that it was a risk business, and entertainment is very much a risk business because, it can be very fickle. You do need talent, you do need to put the work in and the effort, but I do believe, I've only been in the business 10 years, but you need 1 or 2 breaks. You need to be in the right place at the right time.
I think even with everything being right, the right place, the right time, you've got a great show, you're talented, lovely artwork, all that, it still might not work because whatever, it's raining that night, or there's something, it just doesn't all quite gel. We've all been to shows where there's a very light audience and we're thinking, this is terrific, where is everybody? Yeah, but sometimes it just doesn't work, does it?
Well, yeah, I remember, I will use the expression once, and it's not the same words that are used, but there's been a few gigs that I've done over the last few years where people have come, 1 or 2 people have come up at the end and said, or buying CDs or whatever, and saying, so why haven't we heard of you before?
No, I hate that.
Which I think is a kind of backhanded compliment,
but
I think they would like to have heard that's what they mean, but it is that kind of...
Sometimes you should be doing better than this. Sometimes people will see me on a cruise ship and they say, what are you doing on here? Pardon? I thought I was doing all right till you said that.
Yes, and what they're really meaning is we really loved your voice and loved the show.
They should just say that, shouldn't they?
Yeah. No.
So, but what advice could you give to anybody that's... there are a lot of people that, particularly in cabaret, starting out, and it's hard to they don't have much of a name yet, and so they want to put their own show together and get a few people along to, in a small room that maybe holds 60, 70, 80 people, and just do one night, maybe in London or Edinburgh or Birmingham or wherever they are in the world, in their local city. What advice would you give to, other than be cautious and be careful, what advice could you give to somebody that really wants to do that?
It sounds cliched, but I would say be true to yourself in a musical context. I'm sure a number of people think that I latched on to the Sinatra songbook because it was, the Rat Pack shows, and Sinatra's the name still is a very potent one, but I only do it did it and still continue to do it because I became a Sinatra fan when I was 11.
You just told me the story about when you were 16 years old and Ella Fitzgerald sang a song to you on stage, and then you were in a dressing room and introduced you to Count Basie. So I think you're the real thing. But I'm thinking more about not so much the content of the show, but just about promoting, getting people there, putting the thing together.
Right.
To make sure that the evening's a success.
If it's a first show, another bit of advice that I I don't know if I was given it, but I certainly latched on to it, and maybe I read it somewhere. Surround yourself with the best that are either prepared to work with you or you can afford to have on board. I mean, I think my first gig in London, I had Alec Dankworth on bass, Alan Barnes on saxophone, and I'm so infuriated I can't remember the drummer's name.
But we've got the
I
idea.
can see his face.
But it's true. Great people around you, and it's surprising who you can find to work with you, isn't it? You know, if you just ask.
Oh, when I look back, I'm still amazed that they said yes to
They
this.
were probably amazed you even asked.
Yeah.
Who?
The fact that I paid them $5,000 a head, maybe it's something to do
But
with
that's the thing, isn't it? That for not paying the earth, you can get some incredibly talented musicians. And so, practically speaking, if you're doing a small show, perhaps just with a pianist or piano and bass or piano, bass and drums, if you find the very best people that you can, and you might find them by going to see somebody else's show and seeing who the musicians are, or introducing yourself to the musicians after the show, finding them in the bar and introducing yourself, getting a card, because everybody wants a gig, right? And if you're going to pay them a reasonable fee, then just getting the right people to come along and support you on stage, they themselves might not only bring their musical expertise, but might bring a few people along as well, or at least give you some kind of credibility.
Absolutely, because I'm sure when I first appeared, my name wouldn't mean much to them, but if anything, but if they saw, Alan Barnes, he's a great saxophonist, let's go and see them.
And names are important, aren't they? Because, there's a phrase which obviously you're familiar with and most people know, called marquee value. And marquee value is when you can put a name on the marquee outside the theatre that means something, that's going to put bums on seats. So if you've got, of course, these days, if you've got Michael Bublé outside a theatre, it's got enormous marquee value, it's going to fill the place. If you've got the name Gary Williams, it maybe not so much, Yours, Todd Gordon, maybe a little more.
Oh, yeah.
Together, we're as good. Michael Bublé, we'll me and you together, we should do that sometime. But so, for all of my shows, I'm not a name, and so putting and using a name, as you just mentioned, Sinatra. So for a lot of the shows, the touring shows that I've done, really Sinatra's been the top of the bill. We did a show called The Legend of Sinatra. So it wasn't, I tried to put my ego out of it, and it wasn't Gary Williams in. You see any of us singers, we put together our own artwork, and our name's always top of the bill, of course, but it's really probably no place being there, right? It's like, what's really going to get bums on seats, what's really got marquee value is whether it's a tribute to Nat King Cole or Sinatra or Fitzgerald or Michael Bublé or Tony Bennett or the songs of the 40s or whatever it may be, songs of New York or something with our name. Absolutely. And then the musicians, or if you've got a particular star name musician with special guest in big letters, Alan Barnes, recipient of the such and such award or something like this. Yeah. Also, the room itself can have some kind of marquee value, isn't it? I was just saw Chorus Line a few weeks ago at the Palladium, and I was saying to the friend of mine that I was with that a lot of people go to the Palladium, particularly on a Sunday. A lot of tourists go there because they don't even care what's on; they just want to go to the Palladium. I've done the same going to Carnegie Hall in New York. I just want to go. Ronnie Scott's, yeah. People go because it's a name. So if you get in at the right venue, that can be a big help as well, can't it?
Yes. Although I'm still surprised at how challenging it can be to get a decent audience in certain established clubs in London. You kind of think 8 million people, lots of tourists, lots of business people, they'll be looking for something to do, and these are...
It's probably because there's 4 million things to do in London that very night, isn't it? There's so much to do.
Well, that's true, and it's expensive.
Yeah.
That's the other thing. I mean, it's in Edinburgh. You will. It's not often you have to pay over 20 quid for a ticket to go and see someone, but in London, I noticed prices at 40, 60 pounds or whatever. That's a lot, But I think you're right. It's putting. The only caveat I would add to that is that if I would advise people to think about what they're passionate about, don't latch on to, like Michael Bublé. If you're a great admirer of Michael Bublé's material or his style or whatever, then that's fine. You go for it. But if you're a big fan of Leonard Cohen, put a Leonard Cohen I don't know, Joni Mitchell or whatever. It can be more contemporary. It can be a throwback to the swing era or the days of the great crooners or whatever. But as long as you have a genuine passion for it, because I think audiences can see through that in that setting. I think it's different if it's more of a, I kind of think of it as a, like a stage show, like a Rat Pack show. I think people are kind of almost going for a recreation, a more theatrical performance. Or a recreation.
And it's a book, it's written, so even if some of the performers in a Rat Pack show don't really care less about the music, it doesn't really, we're probably not going to see through it because they're following a script, they're being directed, but if you're in a small venue and you're being yourself, I think you're absolutely right. With marketing, as you know from your previous career, the first thing to do is find out what the demand is and then give that to people. But it's tricky with us as performers because we can't just, if we find the demand is for whatever, hip-hop music and we're a jazz singer, we can't just, let's just do a hip-hop night. That's not going to happen. No. But you're absolutely right. We first and foremost have to be true to ourselves, and we have to do that, and then just hope that there are people out there, enough people that can, give us an audience.
If you can manage to get that niche, a singer. I remember seeing her in the Edinburgh Fringe Festival about 20 years ago, maybe longer, and her pianist. Or the trio that she had was led by the pianist Gwilym Simcock, and it was Kate Dimbleby. And Kate has her latest project. When I saw her, it was a Peggy Lee songbook. Her latest project is about one of my favourite singer-songwriters, and that's Dory Previn. Now, most people will not know who Dory Previn is, but because it was so kind of esoteric. She was on Woman's Hour, and I think there were other marketing opportunities that, had she been doing a Anita O'Day songbook, unless it was Anita O'Day's centenary or whatever, she probably wouldn't have got the media coverage that going for that quirkier side did.
Absolutely, and if you're doing something like that, you are going to get a small but a very loyal following, aren't you? And you're just being really true to yourself, and your fans will be so grateful that you're doing it for them as well.
Yeah, as long as that sincerity comes across, and if you go for something you're passionate about, it will. You can't help it. But I think it'd be very difficult to avoid it, just kind of coming out of every pore.
There's a whole chapter in the book on sincerity, and we've mentioned it a few times, and I think it's key to us as cabaret performers, even as concert performers, whatever the way that we connect with the music, and particularly the way that we connect, or it's how we connect with an audience, I think, is just by being sincere and being real when we're up there, because people, I liken it to when you meet somebody at a party. If you're just standing there with a glazed look in your eye, just, saying whatever you think, they might want to hear, or you're churning out a few stories, or you're just feigning interest in their work, people can see through it. And it's not only is it boring to the other person, but it's almost insulting as well, isn't it? But if you're actually genuinely interested, you're genuinely happy to be there, people can see that as well, and they're engaged. I think it's the same on stage.
Absolutely. I think sincerity, as I was saying earlier, one of the things I read about in a Sinatra biography was his approach to a song, and I think his kind of philosophy in life was always be honest. And I didn't quite understand it because I was in my teens when I was reading it, but honesty about interpreting a lyric, that goes hand in hand with being sincere and how you come across to an audience. And I'm not saying, there's a lot of show business personalities who have been quite gushy and they've made very successful careers. But I think there's a better chance of an audience going away if they feel, I like to leave, if I go and see somebody else performing, I like to leave feeling that I've got to know them a little, if that makes sense. Of course. Whereas there's other people that you just think, well, that's a kind of rather, it might have been very polished and professional, but rather perfunctory sort of.
You might as well have just watched a DVD at home or listened to an album. Yeah. And you've just recently released another album. Tell me about that.
Yeah, it's just what the world needs. And there's another one in the pipeline, folks. I find albums. They're really good. They're good for focusing on where you're at the time and hopefully developing. Because, believe you, well, as probably a lot of people in the business know, recordings are very good for highlighting flaws, and you really are under the microscope.
I suppose it's like listening to yourself back on an answering machine, isn't it, or something? You think, God, do I really sound like that?
I know. But the last album I did was this big band one with the Royal Air Force Squadronaires, and we did it in aid of Help for Heroes, the military charity, and it was wonderful. We recorded most of it on all the band tracks on the Northolt Air Base. We've got a fantastic music centre there, and then we added duets on 7 of the 14 tracks, and we just released it, and it's about to be released. It was just been released in Korea. And that's South Korea. I don't think it's a market for me in the north.
Maybe
that's why.
Maybe things get really bad.
Maybe that's why they've got. Maybe it has been released, and also German labels just taking it on. So, but I mean, as to we're not going to. Michael Bublé needn't be worried about being knocked.
How many albums have you recorded now?
I would say 3 proper ones and 2 demos.
Right. So it's 5 albums. You must be getting better at that now, right?
You'd think so, wouldn't you?
What have you learned? What have you learned now? What tips could you give to somebody that's going to go and record an album?
Start saving, because it's expensive. Again, surround yourself with the best you can afford to have on the album. Yeah. And also, because the first demo I did, I remember taking the advice of someone I was working with in the early days, and he said, "Oh no, we don't need to hire in a piano. We'll just use a keyboard. They sound as good these days." Well, I can tell you, they don't.
Yeah.
So get a studio with, maybe you don't, a piano's not required, but for me it was a necessary part. So, just.
I think that's great advice. But people, particularly in this genre, jazz and swing that we do, people think, and if they're fans of Michael Bublé, they think it's got to be with a big band, but they can't usually afford a big band, so they'll get some backing tracks with a sort of big band sound. It's just dreadful. And I say to them, look, try and, even if you're only planning on selling it at gigs, and you're only going to get 500 of them pressed or 1,000 of them pressed and hope you're going to flog them all over the next few years. If you see it as a small thing, doesn't matter. Aim for something of the right quality that could get played on national radio, and instead of spending that money on the best backing tracks you can find that are probably still going to be rubbish, just spend it all on a pianist. Just if I would say, just have the smallest band, but a great band. Whatever Absolutely. You do it well. But and if that means all you can afford is a good piano and a good pianist, or Ella Fitzgerald, I think, did a great album, didn't she? With I think it's called Intimate Ella with Paul Smith on beautiful. And there's also a Johnny Mathis album. I think it's called Two Guitars, which I think it was 2 guitars that he used on that album, and it's but very intimate and very lovely. So maybe it's just a piano bass and drums, but spend all your money on a few great musicians in a good studio.
Well, I would say that having an album for anyone starting out in the business, or at the beginning of their career, the album will not. Well, I would say that it's probably unlikely that you will recoup your costs from sales. You may be lucky in doing so, and that would be terrific. But even if you don't, it's an amazingly good calling card. I got a booking at Michael Parkinson's pub on the back.
You've done it again. You're so good at these names. I love it. And I can only dream of meeting these people one day. And you're like in his pub.
I've seen your
He's buying
website.
you a pint.
But, you also need to be a bit pushy, and I have to say that. It may surprise you, but that does not come easily. He heard the album and he liked it, and I got a booking there. Now, that didn't mean... He also played a track on his show. Now, that's not the same as him championing Jamie Cullum or Claire Teal and playing every other week. That's what really helps propel your career. But
it's quite a compliment, and it's quite a marker, isn't it, to be... when he had his show, to be played on his show and to be invited to his pub, that's a some recognition, isn't it, that you're on the right track?
Exactly,
Anyway.
and you could because he gave me an endorsement and has done since, because that then led. It was how many years? 3.5 years later down the line, I invited him to come and compare a concert I was putting on in the Royal Concert Hall in Glasgow, which was celebrating the centenary of Johnny Mercer. And Mercer is Michael's favourite lyricist. And he came up and I got interviewed by Michael Parkinson on stage.
Fantastic.
And that was all part of, led from that one album.
So Muhammad Ali, Fred Astaire, and Todd
Gordon. I know.
Amazing. Right?
Was that in reverse order?
Isn't it great? And like you say, from this calling card of an album, and if you'd have skimped on it and it wasn't really very good, this is another thing.
Some tracks that aren't.
Well, but I would say this is another thing, that if all you can afford to do is say 3 tracks, do an EP. Do that rather than do 14 tracks of sort of not great stuff. Just do 2 or 3 tracks. Just whatever you do it to the highest quality, the best musicians, the best material, everything that you can find. Another thing I would say is to be super prepared. Absolutely know that material inside out. And what I've learned is that wherever possible, if I'm going to be doing an album, I have recorded albums where the first time I've heard the arrangement has been at the session, and the arrangement means everything, and I'm suddenly, I remember that in 2004 doing this Alone Together album with John Wilson, and it was a big thing, for us, and I heard one of the arrangements, and it was completely different to what I had expected. I wasn't involved in it, I was in discussing how this particular arrangement will be done, and I heard it, and I was horrified because it was completely different, and it meant I had to sing some really difficult things, which were really not way out my comfort zone, and I had to do them then, and that track, I remember, God, it was a nightmare. It was really a nightmare. And what I've learned to do since is that when I'm planning an album, to get the arrangements done and to be performing them all the time with my band. Sometimes I've got gigs. So I think if I do that gig, even though it's not going to pay me very much money, or it's just in the background of a restaurant, and no one's going to be listening, or it's just dinner music for a wedding or something, and it's hardly paying anything, that's the gig that I want to do, because that's where I can hire my band and I can basically just practice this material. And if I get it a bit wrong, no one cares, because no one's really listening. They're interested in the dinner, And so by the time I get in the studio, I'm with my band, I know what I'm doing, and we've performed these songs 20 times, and it's just business as usual. We just go in and record it, as opposed to going in and trying to figure it out in the studio, which is really expensive, and it's never going to really work very well, is it?
Well, you have to remember that it's like a taxi. The meter starts running as soon as you walk in the door, and it's amazing. It's like you're in a time warp, because time speeds up somehow in a recording studio. You think you've got 8 hours ahead of you before you know it's lunchtime.
And another reason for working with the best musicians, because as you will know, if you're working with really great people, they just get it right. They get it right first time. You just want to be worrying about yourself. You don't want to be thinking, I've got to do that take again because the bass player messed up the ending and can't quite figure out what to do with this bit, or that bit's really tricky for the pianist and he never actually did it right on any of the takes, and so we actually can't use that track now, even though you might have done a brilliant vocal performance. You don't want to worry about the wires going crackling, going faulty wires. That's always a problem. Can be a problem. Something's not right. Takes the technical guy, the engineer, half an hour to figure out where there's a little crackle or something. You don't want to worry about that. You want to go great studio, great guy that's organised, great band, arrangements all done, tried and tested. You know what you're doing, so you can just go in and just get it down straight away.
Exactly. I remember there's the elder statesman of bass players in Scotland is a guy called Ronnie Ray, and there's 2 things I remember about him. One is that he said, most groups, but this was in the jazz world, but it applies across the board. He said most jazz trios or quartets or whatever, they do their album, then they tour it. He said it should be the other way around. You should tour the material, then record it. He said, but it never works that way. And the other thing I remember him saying, which also links into what you're saying, Gary, is that I went on the first vocal workshop I went on was a week's course, and Ronnie was the bass player on it. And so this was the first time I'd ever worked with professional musicians. Performed with. And one was just voice and bass. And I remember doing I Get a Kick Out of You, which I would have said I knew pretty well, because I'd never worked or sung with just a bass before, you know, and I remember losing my way and he said, but you don't really know the song. And I thought, yes, I do. And then I thought, no, I don't, because if I did, I mean, I know it to listen to, but I did not know it to sing. And there is something about just feeling, you know, just be absolutely prepared, because that will say it will pay dividends, that's for sure. And the other thing that I when you were talking about, you know, maybe do an EP, because nowadays, as people don't really buy a lot of albums, having 12, 14 tracks, whatever it may be, it's almost irrelevant, because so few people, they'll put it on an iPod and it'll maybe go on shuffle, or they'll flick through things or whatever.
Isn't it? It's really true.
And it's a shame, because in a way it's wonderful if people, you know, like Sinatra's concept albums are almost of a bygone age.
It's true, isn't it? I never thought there's some albums, a lot of those great albums, that they're recorded, they're designed to be listened to from beginning to end. There's a shape to them, like a show, isn't there? But people just don't do that these days.
Whereas nowadays, if you focus on...
Young people these days, they don't really do that, do they?
Oh, I realised I have become a grumpy old man already, I know.
But it's true.
But no, I think if you know, and digital releases, for instance, and you know, so you don't even have to have the cost of the MCPS license to release it, the physical cost of producing the CD and the artwork and the packaging.
Do you not still need to register for MCPS, even if I think you do if it's a digital download, don't you? Or is that right?
That's automatically.
Oh, is it? That's interesting.
Or I have been getting it completely wrong.
That's interesting, because I've just, as you know, there's this Brazil album that I've just done all the MCPS for now. Now that is, I'm sure you're right, of course, because when for those people that are listening, that you register in the UK at least for, it's called an AP2 license, I think, which is basically making sure that the people that write the songs get the royalties for the songs that you're recording. When you fill out the paperwork, of course, you're right, because I fill in, we're going to press 1,000 or whatever,
that's right,
and that's what you pay the thing on, and of course,
it's because MCPS is the M stands for mechanical, and because a download isn't regarded as mechanical production.
Yes.
I suppose you could argue maybe it isn't.
So when we get our statements, I love getting my statements from my downloads and I see that for a Spotify play in sort of Canada or somewhere or you know, Brazil, that I've got 0.000. I think it's this 2p. There might be another naught in there. Yeah. So it's good to know that the MCPS is being paid out of a proportion of the 0.00002p. But anyway, so
I wish the noughts were the other way around. You know,
that'd be nice. One day we can live in hope. Todd, great to talk to you. Thank you for that, and good luck with your career, and good luck with the new album.
Thank you very much indeed, Gary. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you for listening to this Cabaret Secrets podcast. If you've got any comments or questions, please visit cabaretsecrets.com, where you'll also find details of the Cabaret Secrets book, an indispensable guide on how to create your own show, travel the world, and get paid to do what you love.